Hi, everyone. How are you? For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rebecca Mushtare. I'm currently serving as the Deputy Dean of Graduate Studies and faculty in the Department of Art and Design. During this session, I'm going to talk a little bit about personas and how we can use AI to generate those and then to problem solve things that we're designing or distributing. So first of all, what is a persona, right? Personas are design tools, and so my discipline is design. So this is why I lean on something like a persona, but it's a tool that anyone can use in any discipline. But essentially, they are kind of like fake representative samples of people in your target audience, right? So how do you get a persona? Personas are generally kind of an aggregate of multiple people that you would be serving, but they represent the edges, right? And the edges are really the places where we have trouble designing, right? Or we miss maybe those who really excel or those who really struggle. And we often like kind of focus on the middle and we don't necessarily design for the edges. So what personas allow us to do is to design for those edges and think about those edges actively while we're designing curriculum, designing an assignment, working on a communication plan, right? Yeah, so I'm looking at the different audiences, right? Like there's different groups. So the same strategy will work whether you're in a classroom setting or a different kind of administrative setting, because we all deal with audiences in the work that we do. And as soon as there's an audience involved, a persona is a tool that can be deployed. The best personas are ones where you can input some information, some accurate data about who your audience is. You don't always know all the details, but for example, I was working on a summer travel class to Scotland for next summer, and I've taught travel classes previously. And I know that I have had folks that have never flown before, folks that have never been in a large city, wide range of ages and experience levels with traveling, right? On top of whatever the course content is, right? So I did a little bit of this work, and I'm going to show you an example of like what the output was, and then we're going to work on one together. I thought, given that some of the members of the audience in here, maybe we could do something for accessibility and how we could expand the accessibility message moving forward, because I don't want to lose a minute to get some work done, right? And so I didn't do this yet, so I'll just do it live and you can see how I would approach it. Okay, so the first thing that I want to share with you is the personas that I made for travel. So I put in some information about the kinds of audiences I've had in the past. So I told Gemini, I've had students who haven't traveled before, they've never flown before, they've never been to a big city before, different majors, so outside of the discipline I might be teaching in, adult learners, graduate students, undergraduate students, like the gamut of different kinds of students that might end up together. And then for this particular class, I'm actually thinking about, it might be an online class during the summer and then travel following. So it would be a really different kind of scenario than a case where I might know the students in person, right? So there's like this extra layer of complexity there. So I put that in and I tend to ask for like 3 personas, because if it's much more than that, I have trouble keeping track of it when I'm designing something, right? So I usually put in the information about the different kinds of populations I'm trying to serve, remembering to get those extremes, right? Someone who's really anxious. I also put in dietary needs because that's always a problem. That's always a challenge when you're traveling. So I think about kind of the extremes of some of the audiences I've served in the past and kind of put that into Gemini and asked for 3 personas. And what it's doing is taking that data, that information about those different people, and making kind of like an aggregate or like an archetype. And what's helpful is like get names. And then I can remember like, oh, right, Noah would hate this, right? So in this case, it created 3. The anxious first timer, nervous Noah, who is first gen student, low income student, facing a lot of kind of cultural firsts on the trip. He really wants this badly, but is really anxious about funds, money, hidden expenses, things like that. So it gave him a major. talked about travel experience, some of the motivations for going. So he's really excited about maybe seeing some of the things that he's seen in textbooks, but seeing them in person. And then some kind of obstacles that he might face, like those related to logistics or just not having gone through the TSA, for example, and that all those unknowns. And then some tips about what we might design for a student like this, like logistical one-on-one meeting, and then some other opportunities maybe to pair up with a more seasoned like student traveler. The second one is high stakes professional juggling Jessica. So Jessica and Noah have some competing interests here, right? But they're both in the same class. We know all these students, right? We've interacted with them. This student's a graduate student, maybe has a lot of travel or at least a medium amount of travel experience. This mouse is behaving very weirdly. Okay. This is a person who maybe has a lot of things going on in her life, right? Juggling everything. So like a fixed itinerary, knowing all the things up front is going to be really helpful. And she's really focused on these like professional opportunities and networking and things that she might get to do on this trip. So maybe there's opportunities to leverage kind of her experience level on this trip and help that shine, right, during this experience. And then the third one is cultural conscious, creative, vegan veil, who is an upper level student outside of the major in which I would be teaching in, really concerned about kind of the social dynamics of a trip, really into maybe generating some interesting media as a result of the trip. But, you know, being vegan as a lifestyle, just having, you know, a terrible salad as an option isn't going to make her feel a sense of belonging, etc. So this is kind of what it generated after I gave it information. And then what I typically would do is then now I have this in a document, and now I might use AI to do some other things for me. Like, here's my syllabus, here's my assignments, here's my personas. How am I not serving those personas? In what ways could I make their experience better? Right? Those are the kinds of questions that I would ask. So let's imagine the Title II deadline has been extended by 1 year. Is everybody imagining with me? And we have a lot of different audiences we might need to serve, right? This is participatory. So what kinds of audiences might we need to serve? So I would start something like, we are organizing opportunities to expand knowledge and skills at our university related to Title II. We had a number of workshops and symposiums and professional development opportunities leading up to the original Title II deadline of, does anyone remember when it was?
April 7th.
26. We now have until April 2027 and do not want to lose momentum. Our audiences include, okay, this is where I need your help. Who are some of the kinds of people, or maybe the characteristics that we want to make sure are kind of accounted for?
Current students.
Yes, current students who may have no knowledge of Title II. What else? Maybe faculty in STEAM disciplines where digital accessibility is actually like quite a challenge. What else? I think of other audiences. Maybe administrative assistant. Right. You know what's good about AI is it doesn't care if you spell badly. Um, my typing is really bad when I have an audience. What else? We think of other folks? Maybe some highly tech savvy people? What?
As I said, support staff.
Okay. We could continue this, right? And you could add some things in here. So then I'm going to say, please create 3 personas that represent our diverse audiences so that we can design a good communication plan. Communication and professional development plan. So it's so encouraging, right? It's telling us, we're proactive. It's a good thing we're like paying attention. We're not taking our foot off the gas. And so it comes up with 3. Persona 1, the apprehensive beginner. Does anyone know that one? So this one says it represents current students, tech fearful faculty, staff, and administrative assistants handling department communications. This group is either entirely unaware of Title II or highly anxious about what it means for their daily workload, and they don't want it to become, they don't want to become accessibility experts. They just want to know exactly what they need to do to not break the rules. Right. And this seems pretty believable, right? People with a lot of different backgrounds might fit into this kind of general category, but a really important category to kind of be designing for. So this one's kind of like it says the attitude, nervous, uninformed, or overwhelmed. They feel that technology changes too fast for them to keep up. Primary goals to understand why this matters in simple terms, right? They're looking for basic, repeatable steps. You can think kind of workflows or things like that, checklists. Pain points, technical jargon, makes their eyes glaze over, right? And then there's some tips about how to engage them that are included here. So communication, keep it simple, human-centric, jargon-free, professional development strategy, getting started micro-learnings, checklists, templates, lunch and learn sessions, etc. The second one is the complex content creator. So this is the STEAM faculty and tech savvy folks who love to dig into the weeds. The attitude is maybe pragmatic, inquisitive, potentially frustrated by a lack of tools that support their specific disciplines. Primary goals, to find efficient workflows, explore advanced tools, etc. Pain points, generic advice that doesn't feel like it applies to them, right? And ways to engage, direct, factual, acknowledge unique challenges, provide deep dive documentation and advanced resources, professional development strategy, maybe working groups, hackathons, sandbox type stuff, right? So you can see that the strategies might be really different. And then the third one that it came out is the seasoned champion. And I didn't do this ahead of time, right? You just saw me. This is live. This is happening right now. But these are 3 really different categories of people that could really help us think about how to put materials together to kind of continue momentum, right? And then the next thing I might do is say, okay, considering these 3, these 3 personas, right? Like, here's the workshops I have planned. Here's the materials and resources I have. What are my gaps? Right, those might be the next thing. So I might feed in the accessibility website, maybe a schedule that we've started working on, the list of tutorials that we have, and then to start thinking about what's missing from that, right? So this can really apply to any, this is just one example, but this could apply to any kind of materials that you're creating, again, that has an audience, right? So it could be communication. I'm thinking about my grad studies friends. We're talking about different recruitment strategies, but we know kind of who our different audiences are. So we could start with that and create some personas to make sure that our strategies are really hitting these different kinds of personalities or different sets of needs. And you'll notice that often like people have competing needs, which means we need multiple strategies usually to get a message out, right? And so this helps us pay attention. So in this scenario where we're thinking about the accessibility ones, we can say seasoned champion that's not going to help them. We're not thinking about this group at all. Or I already forgot what their names were. Or the complex content creator, like we have some real gaps in support for them. So let's focus on developing some things for this group. And it can just kind of keep it fresh in your mind. And when you give them an actual name, you know, even if it doesn't generate out a name, you could ask for it to give them names and things, right? In your prompt. When they have a name, it becomes really easy for your team to talk about Noah, right? They become real as you're working on it because they have names, they have personality types, and you can kind of envision, because you probably met someone kind of like them, right? So you can kind of envision them and keep them in your head as you're working. And it can just offer an opportunity to kind of check some things and make sure that you're not missing anybody. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, you might have mentioned this, but I must have missed it, but, is it just gonna know, like, how many personas to create? Or do you have to tell it that you want a specific number of personas that have a range of different backgrounds?
I usually ask for about 3, but if I'm doing like a really big project and my audiences are super diverse, I might ask for 5, but I try to keep it something that I can like keep in my head. If it's more than that, you know, more than 3 to 5, like I personally have a hard time like remembering all my different personas, and it becomes hard to keep them in mind. But if you're asking for this smaller amount, they tend, like the system tends to like pick out some important attributes of what you've put in, that they're kind of embedded into the 3. I mean, they're not perfect, right? But they do kind of help you think about it. So I tend to just ask for a specific number. If you do class surveys or have other ways of having some actual like aggregate data, you could also use that as a basis for doing this. So I'm imagining, let's think about making some edits for a class in the fall, right? Maybe you know what their majors are. So you could even provide that, like, oh, the majority of the students and 50% of the students in this class are like in the major the class is in, you know, but maybe there's 25% are in this other thing and the rest are, you know, are taking it for gen ed or something. You know, those, if you have some real data that you can use, that's really helpful. In the case of some of these, it's like, it's not hard numbers, but it is definitely like, these are the things that I've experienced having a lot of experience in this area, right? Having taught multiple travel classes or in that area of accessibility, having been doing this for a long time, like here are some common kind of groups of folks that we tend to work with. Yeah, but there's not only question. Thank you. Anything else? Yeah, sure.
How do I sign up for the trip to Scotland?
It still has to go through the final approvals coming soon.
Do you think it would be helpful to make like a Gemini gem that, because you have a certain catered audience or selection of various students that you could pull from, so you can just start chatting with it about a new idea?
Yeah, I think that would be great, especially if you're like working with a similar population over and over again. I can imagine in the case of accessibility that we've been doing for a long time, it make a lot of sense in that case. If you're working on different classes that change pretty frequently, it might not make as much sense in that context, but certainly a great idea. I often will make some of these things and then use like Notebook LM or something like that and like put all my materials together and like what holes are here? You know, and what assignments am I serving this student? What assignments am I serving this other persona? That kind of thing. And then it limits it to like the things that you've made too, right? It's only looking, if you're in a notebook, it's only looking at the stuff that you've uploaded. So that can be really helpful. And like, here's the materials I created. What are the gaps based on these personas that I've already identified? Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And I'll just add that at 11 o'clock, we will start perspectives on AI, which is downstairs in the cell conference room, and AI for synthesis from chaos to clarity will be here in classroom 215, and the Zoom links are on the schedule.